Ho ho! 1-800-449-8255. The Clark the Shark Show. And I'm about to review probably the best Frank Zappa album. Not the best played. You know, Zappa albums are really technical in the 70s. You know, Waka Jawaka and all those. And he just gets incredible. But back in the 60s, in terms of entertaining albums, and this isn't really the cover of the album. The gatefold somehow showed this, but the cover everyone knows, and I know, of course, is this. This parody tribute to the Ruttles, Sergeant Revolver's Lonely Hearts Magical Mystery Trip. I mean, look at that. That's classic. And Paul McCartney and the Beatles prevented Zappa from doing this cover back in the 60s. Threatened to sue Frank Zappa and the Mothers. And it would have been great, but eventually this did become the cover. By the time I was, a kid, this was the cover of the album. When I was like 12, 13, 14, 15, and back in Torrance and Redondo Beach. This is the album I knew, baby. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. We're only in it for the money. And of course, the Greenhouse Effect, Big Teen Dollars, definitely is a tribute, paying homage to this amazing album, in its own little way, 1992. Where do I even begin with this amazing album? I mean, it's just so crazy. The Zappa albums before this one are really killer. Of course, Freak Out in 1966 is badass. But then, Absolutely Free. And there's the one where Zappa doesn't actually play, he's just conducting it and he wrote it. And it's like from 1967. And of course, it's amazing and it's way ahead of its time. But then again, it's typical Frank Zappa. But when Frank was with the Mothers, all those albums are killer, man. And of course, he jammed right up to, I think, 1970 or, then he put together a new Mothers band that's, just killer, man. Killer band, killer. And I think one of the guys he jammed with is Chester Thompson, who later was in Genesis. I think, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was a member of one of the versions of the later Mothers in the early 70s. But I prefer the original band with all these wacky rejects and 1960s misfits. I mean, nothing to me says punk rock, indie, alternative more than Frank Zappa and the Mothers. I mean, these guys invented everything, man. And it's all original. When I listen to Zappa, it's not like it's derivative or he's paying homage. It seems like everything Frank Zappa and the Mothers ever did in the 60s, you never heard it before. Especially Freak Out, but I'd say those other albums too. Uncle Meat and Absolutely Free, and of course this album, and that one 1950s. They do like a 1950s tribute, man. It is so awesome. I love that album. At 1-800-449-8255, Frank Zappa and the Mothers. We're only in it for the money, to me, is Oh yeah, baby, 5 stars. It's a 5 star album. And I must have played this album 10,000 times. And I keep hearing brand new things like we're in a Matrix simulation. And I'm like, how could I not have heard that? I've played this album 10,000 times from start to finish. And I keep hearing new things every week when I play this album. You know, of course, Are You Hung Up has Eric Clapton doing some spoken word into the mic, and the hilarious Who Needs the Peace Corps. And I honestly think Frank Zappa's number one competition back in the 60s was The Who. And he was very worried about the new Who album that was coming out in 1967. You know, what makes this album even more ahead of its time and incredible, amazing, is the fact that this album was supposed to be released in 1967, people, not 1968. This whole album was recorded in 1967. But I think, there was some reason why the album was delayed. Probably the lawsuits and, stuff with Paul McCartney, or I don't know. But I really believe Frank Zappa was worried about the Who sell out. He wanted to see what the Who were going to do. And of course, they put out just that incredible album too late. I think the Who Sell Out was supposed to come out back in like August of 67 or even before. But the Who were carefully putting brush strokes on that album to make it perfect. And, other reasons delayed the release of the Who Sell Out. But definitely Frank Zappa's number one competition for rock comedy. And believe me, only The Who and Zappa and a few other bands were mining this genre. Funny, ironic, hilarious songs that are just about you or about life. That are just classic. And Frank Zappa was very concerned that The Who Sell Out might have been their breakout album. So he delayed We're Only in It for the Money until 1968. And of course, The Who Sell Out was just funny and amazing. And, plus Frank Zappa wanted to say, hey, I wasn't influenced by that. My album was already done and in the can before The Who. So he wanted to make sure he's the originator. Frank Zappa is always the funniest, most ironic, most irreverent genius. He don't want any competition. And believe me, The Who Sell Out was major competition for anything. If you were a funny man or a funny band back in the 60s, man, you were concerned about The Who because aside from smashing their gear and putting on that insane, wild stage show, The Who and their studio albums were amazing. Maybe they weren't heavy like The Who live, but they were definitely communicating a thing about life with their rock and roll acumen, their rock and roll IQ 101. And Frank Zappa knew who the main competition was in his business, in his genre. So when he put out We're Only in It for the Money in 1968, he made sure there was an island of, sanctuary all around him, where he's like, okay, man, now the Who are working on that crappy Tommy, rock opera nonsense, and I don't have to worry about them anymore. And really, this album is like the first Cheech and Chong. You remember those funny albums back in the 70s? Well, Frank Zappa and the Mothers, We're Only in It for the Money, is the original Cheech and Chong, man, or the original funny 1970s stuff, but done back in the 60s. And, Concentration Moon, very awesome, man. Concentration Moon. Wish I was back in the alley. It's awesome, man. And of course, Mom and Dad love it, It's such a metaphoric statement, social comment on everything. And then Zappa has this telephone conversation where he's like paranoid, and the FBI is going to bump him off, and him and his wife or girlfriend or whoever is on the phone. It's just so funny and ironic and humorous the way Zappa, you know, he's just thought of ideas that I thought of, but Zappa did them better 40 years ago, man. I thought I was a genius and I invented everything grunge and cool punk indie that gets on the radio. You know, I just thought I was the cat's meow until I realized Frank Zappa, man, did everything I do and better than me long ago. But like almost before I was even born. And I can say this about every Frank Zappa album. This guy's got like 200 albums. He's got, posthumous albums after his death. But every single Frank Zappa album, I swear to God, is amazing. You listen to it and it's like totally in detail. There is no cutting corners with Frank Zappa. Every album. And you can listen to it over and over and you're like, my God, this is perfect. This man was a genius. And they even asked Frank Zappa, man, do you think you're a genius? And he was like, eccentric, definitely genius, maybe. When I'm telling you right now, Frank Zappa was genius, definitely. That's Clark the Shark telling you, man. Every album is like this one, but this one is the one that grabs you. It's so funny and it's just so ironic, and it's even kind of sad and pathetic because it's such a statement about the planet Earth and our miserable lives. It's just incredible. Bowtie Daddy, awesome, man. Funny, ironic. Harry, you're a beast. Oh, God. Side one of this is amazing. And what's the ugliest part of your body? Well, of course, Frank thought it's your mind, not your toes. And the song Absolutely Free is just so amazing. It's just such a beautiful little melodic thing that just takes you away into the sky and sails off into the atmosphere and out into the universe. I love that song, Absolutely Free. It's so melodic and awesome. And then Flower Punk, where, Frank is like mocking, everything back in the 60s. The people that play bongos in the dirt. And of course, so many bands were doing like the Arthur Lee, like, hey Joe, did. And of course, Frank Zappa just had to mock all these bands that kept doing that song over and over and over. And he turned it into like this progressive rock thing that sounds like Genesis or something. And it's just retarded. It's so funny. And, hot poop. And then side 2 of this gets really weird. And it's almost puts a spotlight on you, where it's talking about you, and it's talking right to you, my friend, the listener of this album. Let's make the water turn black. And the Idiot Bastard Son, just a great melody, great little tune, very ironic, very funny. I mean, this is better than The Who. If you want the truth, Zappa is right there. The Who brush against things, but they've got that 60s rock and roll thing. It's pretty funny and it's pretty clever, but Zappa takes it into more detail and goes to another level. And the Lonely Little Girl song, I love it, man. It's so true and it's so accurate. And Take Your Clothes Off When You Dance, of course. Melodic and beautiful and funny and ironic. And, what's the ugliest part of your body? Reprise, of course, that's his little paying homage to how much Frank hated the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper. And, the chrome-plated Megaphone of Destiny. Well, this whole album, my friends, is the megaphone of destiny. Frank Zappa and the Mothers. We're only in it for the money. The greatest rock opera ever written. The songs are sped up. The voices sound like chipmunks. But it's really tight and it's really funny. It's better than Cheech and Chong. It's better than The Who. It's funnier than like everything, man. And it's so ironic because it's all about you. It's all about me and it's all about us. It hits home more than The Who, Tommy. And it's a dangerous album, man. This album was scary back in the day. And the production is just such a marvel. It's a marble. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, 1968. Should have been 1967. This amazing album at 1-800-449-8255. The Clark the Shark Show. Of course, it gets 5 stars. Of course. It's silly. It's funny. It's better than The Who. It's funnier than everything. This album right here. It's not funny at all. It's serious. It talks about our wacky, crazy, mixed up world, way ahead of its time. I mean, these guys are before Iggy Pop, man. They're basically before Bowie. They were incredible before The Who was incredible. Or about the same time, The Who sellout, which Frank Zappa was very mindful of. He knew he wanted to be better than The Who sellout. And Frank wanted to be funnier and more in tune, than the Monkees or all that stuff, man. That movie, The Monkey's Head, is so incredible, and it's got Frank in it. But to me, that movie is like a Frank Zappa album. It's just so ironic and funny, and it's just so accurate, and it just nails it, man, about our life here in this matrix where we're just all being tortured day to day in and day out, where God just gets his kicks, and he thinks this is funny and amusing, and dinosaurs, UFOs, rock, shale, different zones, generations, plateaus, eras, stages, phases of the earth, locked in the rocks, and Frank is buried in an unmarked grave. Today, man, I want to go there and just put a marker on Frank Zappa's grave. Because Frank Zappa shouldn't be buried in an unmarked grave. And I don't care what Frank wanted, or his wife wanted, or his kids want. Frank Zappa is the all-time legend, genius, great man of rock and roll. Funny man, but only to a few. Only to those who know Frank. Only to those who know all 200 of his albums. And he's got more that are coming out, because the Frank Zappa vault goes on forever. This guy jammed with everybody, man. Satriani, Steve Vai, all the great musicians, Jack Bruce, Chester Thompson. People wanted to play with Frank Zappa, man, because later on in the 1970s, his music is so difficult. They called it like Black Pages. The Black Page, because there's so many notes, and they're so complicated. They're so technical. They make Emerson, Lake and Palmer look easy. Frank Zappa's music in the 70s is so technical. It is the most technical thing you have ever heard, my friends. He makes Yes, ELP, and Jethro Tull and The Who and Zeppelin look like child's play, like a picnic. That's how difficult it had to be for Frank Zappa. Every song had to be amazing. It had to tell a true story of life. In the Frank way, it had to be funny. It had to be weird. It had to be off the wall, just wacky, just like the mind of Frank. And yet the people who knew Frank always said he's the least funny guy, man. When you meet him in person, he's always serious. And he's always in the studio working, doing something, crafting a new, amazing album. Another genius, beyond a rock opera. Incredible album by Frank Zappa. Another one every year. 3 a year. Back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Sadly, Frank died, man. He died right around the same time as Harry Nilsson. Man, when Frank died, I was like, what? But I heard he was sick, with the cancer, but I was, you're still in shock and surprised when you hear the news. That man, Frank Zappa, the great genius, his great band, incredible band, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, with an incredible album, 1968's We're Only in It for the Money, where they're parody of the Beatles. How dare anyone make fun of the Beatles? Frank Zappa made fun of left-wing people, liberal hippies, and he made fun of right-wing people. He made fun of everybody because Frank Zappa was sublime. He was a genius. He was above everybody. This man was above you and me, people. Frank Zappa. Every album's genius. Every album's incredible. I can't say enough about this guy, man. Nothing influences me more than Frank Zappa. Nothing. No albums are this incredible. Ever. He's got the most incredible albums. Listen to Waka Jawaka. Listen to Peaches and Regalia. Hot Rats. Listen to The Grand Wazoo. Listen to them all, man. Joe's Garage, whatever it's called, where Frank's in blackface. This guy was politically incorrect. He would do anything. And he wasn't trying to make you laugh. He was trying to shock you. He was trying to make you think. Frank Zappa was funny because he was so serious. He was always ironic. And he's always thinking what you're thinking. And yet he's still way ahead of you. You're nowhere near Frank Zappa. Nowhere near this genius. None of us ever will be. There will never be another musician like Frank Zappa. I mean, I can't even describe this guy. He's not funny at all. He's just pure irony. And yet, in the end, when you squeeze it out of the machine, it's funny. It's irreverent, classic genius, Frank Zappa. Great album. I wish it was in 1967. I wish this was before the Who sell out. Because some people think, he's ripping off the Who or something, but he wasn't. He was a genius. He was way better than the Who. He knew more than the Who. He was funnier, more ironic. I mean, Pete Townshend's a genius. He gives a funny interview. He's ironic. He smashes his guitar, and he's thinking what you're thinking. He is you before you are you. But Frank is too, man. Frank Zappa and the Mothers. 1-800-449-8255, The Clark the Shark Show. And I just gave you the most accurate, amazing review you're ever going to get of We're Only in It for the Money. 1968, this amazing album. I want you to go buy it right now, who's ever listening to me. Go and get this album. It is incredible. This Frank Zappa album. This Frank Zappa album is incredible. I'm telling you, people, this is one of the best albums you'll ever hear. Listen to it once, and then think about it, and then go back and listen to it one more time. And you know what? You will never be able to stop listening to this incredible, amazing album. Is it the greatest album ever recorded? No. Is it the greatest Frank Zappa album? No. But maybe, man, it is so fucking good. Frank Zappa, We're Only in It for the Money. Ironic, genius, funny, weird, tripping you out, man. And Frank did no drugs. Frank was a drug. This guy never touched acid or weed. Never. Nothing. He just had a pack of smokes, cups of coffee, and he went into the studio and he made amazing albums. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Clark the Shark's favorite band. God bless him. I'm out. That's the VR.